Okay, so this chapter is a relatively, I think will be an incredibly easy chapter for everyone in this class, because essentially what it does is just reviews what you would have done in your principles course across 2 or 3 chapters when we looked at supply, demand, and equilibrium and government involvement in that market. So with that said, I'm going to go over this chapter very quickly, much faster than I would any of these other chapters which are new material to you. If you need more detail than what I'm covering here, it's very easy for you to send me an email, and I will send you the videos that I have for the principles classes where I do each of these across 2 or 3 chapters. No shame in asking for me to send you those videos. I really, or if you want to remain anonymous, you can simply use my YouTube channel and search for the video as well. If you want to look at the video but don't want to admit you're looking at the chapter, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so with that said, essentially what we're doing here then is looking at demand, supply, how those interact to get to the equilibrium, what happens when we have government involvement in that market, and then what happens to the equilibrium, how it changes when there's a change in the demand or the supply curve, and or both. And one of the first things that we do when we look at demand, obviously, is we talk about how it's a downward sloping curve. That the downward slopingness of the curve comes from the law of demand, which again just tells us that the inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. That's our law of demand, right? Is that we see this inverse relationship between the two, and that what demand tells us is it tells us that 2 conditions are present, which is a willingness and ability of the consumer to purchase that product at any particular price. Willing and able, right? We can talk about things. Why don't I have a speedboat, right? I'm certainly willing to have a speedboat, right? It would be very nice to be able to travel between the islands, but I don't have the money for it. I'm not able to do that. We could talk about other things that I'm able to do, but I'm not willing to do, right? Like, I am able to buy a unicycle, right? I don't know how much unicycles cost, but half the price of a bike, right? There's only one wheel. But I just think it's weird and creepy for grown men to be riding unicycles. So I'm not willing to do that, right? We can think of lots of different goods where one condition is fulfilled and not the other. There's some where neither condition is fulfilled, right? A Tesla car. I neither have the ability to buy such a car, nor am I willing to buy such a fancy car, right? And we can talk about things where both conditions are fulfilled. I bought a Slurpee this morning, right? Both the ability was present and the willingness was present. I know, exciting, big spender, huh? There we go. There's our demand curve. Inverse relationship between price and quantity. And then what we need to talk about is that there's a difference between a movement along the curve versus a shift of the curve. This right here is the slide that's kind of referring to the movement along the curve. That would mean that I'm essentially saying that I'm, for instance, moving from point A to point B along the demand curve. The way that I get a movement from A to B is by changing the price. Changing the price leads to the change in the quantity demanded. This movement comes from the law of demand. The law of demand gives us the movement between these 2 points. Changing the price changes the quantity demanded. You'll notice here that I'm writing quantity demanded as Q subscript D. That's how I'll write that in this course. Otherwise, I'll be talking about demand, and if I shift the demand curve, I'll just talk about it as a change in demand. But here we have a change in the quantity demanded. A movement along the curve. Now, what about the shift? Right? I could get the shift of the curve, which would look something like this. So here I'm saying this is an increase in demand. Here I'm talking about an increase in quantity demanded. Caused by different things. This is caused by a change in the price. This is caused by a change in something other than the price. And that's what you see right here. Changing a factor other than the price leads to this. Changing only the price causes the movement along the curve. And that's what we see in this slide right here, right? That I'm getting the movement along the curve caused by the change in the price. Changing the demand is from changing something other than price. What is those things that are other than price that can change? Here's our list of factors. So we're saying here then that my desire to purchase something is dependent on several factors. That demand is a function of the price of the product. And let's call this variable number 1, variable number 2, variable number 3, variable number 4, variable number 5, variable number 6. So demand is a function of price, variable number 1, variable number 2, variable number 3, 4, 5, and 6. When I change just this, there's our movement. And within that law of demand, what we're typically saying is that this is employing the ceteris paribus assumption. And what ceteris paribus says is that these things are being held constant.